Okay, folks, this is the site for the FAFSA protocol. Prototype. And essentially, we'll be able to move through the FAFSA as a dependent student, and then it's also going to show us what the experience is going to look like for a parent. For those of you who have seen this for the first time, take a step back, take it all in. If you have any questions, by all means, use the Q&A function or the chat function. If something comes up and you're like, wait, I didn't understand that, please use those functions, and I'll be sure to, if they light up, I'll check into them. Otherwise, I'll circle back at the end of the talk and address any questions that may come up. So as I shared a minute ago, I will be sharing all of these links with you so you'll be able to access this information. So when the student goes to the FAFSA website, they will enter their FSA ID and their password. We encourage families to begin this process of creating an FSA ID, ideally a week before they intend to complete the application. In years past, it hasn't been this kind of long wait time between creating an FSA ID and then getting it verified for Social Security Administration. And even in years past, students didn't have to have it verified in order to use it on completing the FAFSA. That has changed. So please make sure that families have ample time, or at least have an awareness that they should have this FAFSA, the FSA ID completed and verified before they sit to actually complete the application. Students need one as well as parents. In the deep dive, I'll go into the details around what that process is going to look like and what are the changes with creating an FSA ID this year. But for the demo, we're just going to act as if the student has created one already and the parent has created one already. So we're going to log in. And so this is the main site. Anyone who even can search FAFSA.gov, the link will come up for the full federal student aid website that goes directly to the FAFSA. You will click Start New Form, or the student will click Start New Form. And so this is the intro screen that students will see. This year, they want students to take ownership of the application. So they would rather the student move through the application first, do their section, and then invite their parents to complete their section. In years past, and even this year, a parent can create the application, but they would rather the student kind of start because it's easy to make those connections. The parent could start the application, and once the student does their part, there may be something that comes up in the student part that may require the parent to loop back in. So instead, we encourage students to start with their section. In federal student aid, this is actually guidance from them. Students to start their section, and then in the demographics section, when they include their contributors, the parents will then be alerted that they have been invited to complete their section. So the question is, if a youth has created an FSA ID before, do they have to keep the same login or credentials? Yes, you will use, if a student has created an FSA ID, they can only create one because they'll be using their Social Security number and their date of birth. So once they've created one, they will reuse the same FSA ID forever. They'll use it every year when they complete the FAFSA. And if they take on any federal student loans, they'll use the same FSA ID to manage those loans in the FSA system. A change this year is that they're providing the demo videos throughout the application to give families an idea of just kind of what is the FAFSA, what is this particular section. Now, students will be required to kind of push play on the video, but they only have to do it once. They don't have to do it every time they log into the FAFSA. But the goal is to give them some insight into what this process is going to be like. Because of the prototype, there are some things that are limited. As I mentioned earlier, the same level of functionality is not here for the prototype as it would be for the demo. But I would encourage you, many members of our team definitely do this. We have our own FSA IDs. We log in, we see this in real time. So I encourage you to create your own or use yours and then see what this full video is like. It's not long, it's about 2 minutes long, and it gives families insight into what the FAFSA process is. Another couple questions. However, the process for the we haven't gotten to that yet. So there's a question around parents without social security numbers. We're going to discuss that in the deep dive. Right now, we're just moving through the application. So essentially, again, more information. What I love about the new rollout, one of the things I enjoy about the new rollout of the FAFSA is that it really does work hard to make sure that families understand what's happening. Yes, it's a bit text heavy, but I think this information is necessary. And this drop-down menu will show families all the information or documents that they may need. If they forget and they're sitting to do their FAFSA, this kind of onboarding process is to make sure that they're aware of what the FAFSA is and also know what information they need to get the app done. Continuing with more intro, they're letting the students know who the contributor is. Every contributor must provide consent and approval for you to be eligible for federal student aid. This is going to come up a couple times throughout the application because consent is a big thing this year. Consent essentially is one of the big changes for the new FAFSA. Essentially, it's the parent and the student agreeing to provide their consent for their information to be pulled from the IRS. In the deep dive, I'll go into detail around really what that consent and approval means. So I even have a list of what really that consent really means, all the things that they're consenting to in that process, and that's coming up in the second hour. They report federal student aid that it reports that it takes about an hour to complete the application. I can't say that it has taken me an hour to get through the FAFSA with any student when all things are working properly. I think it's taken about 30 minutes, I think, from beginning to end. So I don't think it's longer than it has been in the past, no. So we're going to click continue. So again, they're giving them more information. Now they're telling them, after you submitted the FAFSA, what can you expect? They're saying after January 2024, your form will process within 3 days. This is generally what they expected to happen. They did not anticipate some of the challenges that have come with the rollout of the new FAFSA. So it's taken more than 3 days, but generally the information here is what it will look like in an ideal setting. So I anticipate next year, this is what it's going to look like. But as it stands now, many students have not been awarded. Their forms have not been processed yet. So just hold tight. This information is just to give students an overview of what to expect under normal operating circumstances. So now let's jump into the application. They ask the student to verify this information. This information is already populated because the student had to enter this information to create an FSA ID. So the student is asked to review the information they've already submitted. They can make changes here if their permanent address has changed. But if the permanent address changes on the application, the student should always also log back into their federal student aid account, their studentaid.gov account using the same FSA ID, and make those changes under their profile on the actual account. If there is a disconnect in information between the FSA ID and the actual FAFSA, it would prohibit a student from being able to submit the application. So please make sure that that information matches. So once we review that, we hit continue. The student state of residence, because this is a prototype, we can't necessarily make the same changes that I would with a demo site, but we're going to choose New York for the sake of getting through the application. The student's date that they became a resident of New York was, let's say it was 2015. And then continue. Students will choose, obviously, the answer that makes sense. So now the next screen explains what consent and approval looks like and what it means. So here they make students understand the importance of what consent and approval means. It says your consent and approval is needed to retrieve and disclose federal tax information. With your consent and approval, we can obtain tax return information automatically from the IRS to help you complete the FAFSA form. If you don't provide consent and approval, you will not be eligible for federal student aid, including grants and loans. You must provide consent and approval even if you didn't file a U.S. federal tax return or any tax return at all. So please make sure students understand what this means, but they also recognize that consent is required for students to be considered for federal aid. That consent has to be provided by the student, as well as any contributors who will be providing information on the application. They must provide consent for the student to be approved for federal student aid. So again, it gives an outline of everything it's going to be used for. And in the second session, I actually give a summary of each bullet around consent and approval. So hold tight if you want to see exactly what students are consenting to, because I actually give it to you in the second hour. Also, they have this drop-down menu for Q&A. If families are just more curious about, like, what does this look like for me? What happens after I provide consent? Really helpful information if parents are curious or want to know more about what they're consenting to. So if a student chooses decline, this is what the pop-up looks like. The student will be ineligible for federal student aid. You did not agree to the terms of this page. The student will not be eligible for federal student aid, including grants and loans, if you don't agree to the terms. Select provide consent to provide your consent. Now I'm going to click decline here so that we can see what it looks like, because this pop-up, or students will have a couple other opportunities throughout the application to provide consent, just so that they understand the importance of providing consent and the necessity to provide consent in order for them to be eligible for aid. So I'm going to click decline here. And then we move on to the first real section of the application, which is the section that determines whether a student qualifies for an unusual or a special circumstance. This year's FAFSA, this is one of the first sections, whereas in years past, it's kind of been flipped to maybe the third section in the middle of the application. They moved the student circumstance question towards the beginning because it then informs what other questions may come after that in this new FAFSA environment. So here it says your personal circumstances. We'll ask you questions that help us determine your eligibility for federal student aid. This information will affect the types of federal student aid you're eligible to receive. So we're going to hit continue. They ask about the student's current marital status. We're doing this application from the perspective of a dependent student. So this student is single, never been married, and continue. There is a question. Do you know if a parent changes their mind about submitting the tax form info from no to yes, how can we edit it? Well, the parent will be able to make those changes in the actual platform. They won't be able to, they'll be able to submit the application, but they won't be considered for federal aid. So we encourage folks to make that decision. If they are weary about it, don't submit the application until they know for sure. What we're finding is that once applications have been submitted, it's not as easy for anyone to make changes. In years past, 2 to 3 days, the application has been processed. Students can log in and make changes. That's not what's happening now. Folks who need to make changes to the application, because the app has not been processed yet, they may have to wait till early February, mid-February to log in and make those changes. So we encourage them, if you're iffy about it, press pause and wait until you're sure that you want to provide consent. Not providing consent means that the student won't be eligible. So it doesn't even make sense to complete the application if the family is not going to provide consent. So I just want to make sure there's an awareness. All right, next they ask about the student's college or career plans. When the student begins 2024 school year, what would their college grade level be? Student will choose first year, freshman. Even if they are currently doing dual enrollment coursework, they will still choose first year freshman in this section. Next, when the student begins the 2024-25 school year, will they have their first bachelor's degree? This answer used to be populated automatically, but now we have to actually choose no, that the student will not have their first bachelor's degree by the beginning of the next school year. Next, they ask those lists of circumstance questions that may qualify a student for a dependency override. Those questions ask if the student is currently serving active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purpose other than training, if they are a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, if they have a child or a dependent, if at any time since the age of 13 they were orphaned. This is a new question, but if a student does not have a living biological or adoptive parent, they are considered to be an orphan. So they can receive a dependency override. Next, if at any time since the student turned 13, they are a ward of the court. If at any time since the student turned 13, they were in foster care. Also, if the student is in a if they are a legally emancipated minor as determined by the court of the state of Virginia, or if they're in a legal guardianship, again, with someone other than a parent or a step parent in the state of Virginia. Most students, though, will choose none of these apply because we're, again, completing this from the perspective of a dependent student. So none of these apply. But if any of them are applicable for students you're supporting, choose that question and it'll route you to a different part of the application that does not require a student to submit parental information. That is actually known as, I forgot the term they're using for, provisional independent status for some students. But again, we're doing this from the perspective of a dependent student. We'll talk about the provisional independent student status during the second section of today's workshop. All right, at any time on or after July 1st, 2023, was a student unaccompanied and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? I'm so glad that they changed the wording of this question because it was confusing in the past. So just to be clear, the student has to be unaccompanied, so not with a parent, and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. So a student who chooses yes for this question will get that provisional independent status that I mentioned earlier, and we'll have to provide additional information to the college to be given that dependency override. But we're doing this from the perspective of a dependent student. So we're going to say, no, this student was not unaccompanied and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. Next, this other new section is to determine whether a student may qualify for an unusual circumstance. An unusual circumstance means there's a change in the family's, excuse me, there is a change in the student status that may qualify them for that dependency override as well. Students who choose yes for this question will be given that provisional independent student status that I mentioned earlier that I'll talk more about in the second section. But a student may be experiencing unusual circumstances if they were left home due to abusive or threatening environment, are abandoned by or estranged from their parents due to either desertion or issues of safety, have refugee or asylee status, and are separated from their parents or their parents are displaced in a foreign country, are a victim of human trafficking, are incarcerated or their parents are incarcerated, and contact with their parents would pose a risk to the student. Just to be clear, just if the parent is incarcerated, that does not qualify them for the unusual circumstance. They have to also make a claim that contact with the parent put their safety at risk. Lastly, otherwise, the student may be unable to contact or locate their parent, again, due to desertion or issues of safety. If that is applicable to students you support, choose yes, but again, we're doing this from the traditional dependent student, so we're going to choose no. Continue. So they're informing the student, based on your answers, though, you are considered to be a dependent student. This means you must provide parent information on the FAFSA form. This information helps to determine how much federal student aid you're eligible to receive. It also has this question, which isn't new for this year. A student may apply for the direct unsubsidized loan only. There were a couple questions that were submitted during registration about if a student isn't able to access their parents' financial information because the parent is unwilling to share, does that mean that there are going to be more aid options? They still are only able to access that unsubsidized loan for $2,000 if the parent is unwilling to provide their financial information. So if the parent's unwilling to provide information, the answer is no. All right, so now they've determined that the student is a dependent of other folks. Now let's determine who should be the contributor on the student's FAFSA. So now they're gonna shift to asking questions about the parent to identify who the contributor should be. So are the parents married to each other? We're going to say yes. And provide information for both parents. If the answer is no, they then ask other questions to identify who in that one parent household will be the contributor. So do the parents live together? Yes or no? We're going to say no, the parents do not live together. Next, did one parent provide more financial support than the other parent over the past 12 months? Now, generally they're saying the parent that provided 51% or more of the student's expenses over the past 12 months is considered to be the contributor. But let's say there's a situation where both parents are saying, we contribute more, we contribute the equal amount. We both contribute the same. Federal student aid says that the student should choose the parent that has the most income and assets as their contributor. So this question is kind of two-part. Did one parent provide more financial support? If the answer is no, then the student then has to decide for themselves which parent has the most income and assets, and then they will click a box here. So we're going to say, did one parent provide more financial support than the other? No. Has the parent you identified in the previous question remarried? So this lets us know that once a student have identified who that contributor is of the single parent household, has that parent gotten married to a step parent? If the answer is yes, the student must provide information about that parent as well as the step parent. It does not matter if they share household with the student. If that parent provides more than half of the student's financial support and that parent has gotten married, then the step parent is also a contributor. So we're going to say yes. So the student has to provide information for both the parent and the step parent. So let's continue. Next, the student will be given the opportunity to provide information for both the parent and the step parent. Because this is a prototype, we're not going to have the same challenges as a student regularly completing this application. We know that with the new FAFSA rollout, some students are having challenges listing a parent on the FAFSA. We're just going to move through this in kind of a best case scenario type of spirit, but we'll address what some of those challenges are during the deep dive as well as during the FAFSA Q&A section. So let's say the the parent's name is T-Tran. Let's give them a date of birth. Excuse me. If a parent who does not have a social security number is completing this section, they are not able to use all zeros. I know in years past, some folks have thrown in all zeros on the regular FAFSA to be able to just kind of move through that section. That is no longer an option. So parents have to actually click the box. My parent does not have a social security number, or the student has to click it when they include the parent on the FAFSA for them to be sent to a different section to provide information. But this is an awareness to federal student aid that the parent needs to create an FSA ID through the ID proofing process or through the knowledge verification process. But we're going to unclick this to do this as a parent who has a social security number. Just giving them an email address. And so from here, the student can list information for both parents. Both will receive an email inviting them to complete the section of the FAFSA. But if the parents filed, if the parents filed married jointly, only one parent needs to complete the parent section of the FAFSA. And that's whoever gets the email first, create their FSA ID, log in and do their section. If the parents filed married separately, they filed separately, then both parents will have to create an FSA ID. Both will have to respond to the invitation to complete their section on the FAFSA, and both have to log in to complete their sections because both have to provide consent separately due to the fact that it's two different 1040s. So they would have to provide information separately. So let's move forward with the application. So now the next section is the student demographic section. At this point, the parent will get an email inviting them to complete their section of the application. But if the parent doesn't get the email, once the student lists the parent as a contributor, once the parents create an FSA ID, they can log right into the FSA website, go to complete FAFSA form, and the invitation will pop up immediately saying, Rhea Tran has invited you to complete a section as a contributor on her application. It'll show up immediately. So they don't have to wait for the email to come from Federal Student Aid in order to have that direct link. Once the student has listed them and push send or submit and move on to this screen, the parent has now have access to complete their section on the FAFSA. So next, student demographics. They make a point here of letting us know that questions used for research, these questions will be used for research purposes only and will not affect a student's eligibility. So if they prefer not to answer, is perfectly fine. They're really just using this for data purposes. So what is the student's gender? We're going to prefer not to answer. Oops, sorry, it's a little delay. All right, if the student is the student of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, we can say yes or no. The student will prefer not to answer. Again, they ask specifically about the student's race, even after a student may choose yes to one of the questions above, but they ask about the student's race. They will choose one of those factors, or they could prefer not to answer, and then continue. There is a question. Do you know if a student's parent changes their mind about, if a student says yes, one parent provides more, and that parent is not remarried, that is the only parent that needs to do the FAFSA. Yes, if the student if the student chooses a parent that provides the majority of their financial support, and that parent is not remarried, the student will only list that parent on the FAFSA, no step parent, because there's not a step parent involved. All right, next is student citizenship status. We will choose U.S. citizen. I know this has been an issue for some students in the past. Students this year who are eligible non-citizens are not been able to enter their T visa. We could talk about what that troubleshooting process looks like later. But again, we're just going to do this from the perspective of a traditional dependent student. Next, to either the student's parents attend college or complete college, we're going to say neither attended college. Next, they ask was the student parent or guardian killed in the line of duty while either one serving an active duty as a member of the armed forces on or after the events of 9/11, or performing official duties as public safety officers. This is for consideration for the Iraq and Afghanistan service grant that awards the student the equivalent of the Pell Grant if they check yes to this question. Well, we're going to select no. Next, more demographic information about the student. What would the student's high school completion status be? High school diploma, but they would choose whatever answer that is relevant. What high school did the student graduate from? We're going to choose Virginia. We're going to choose Richmond. I'm going to choose C. There wasn't a lag. Because the prototype doesn't have information for every city listed, you kind of play around to figure out which cities are here and which cities have a school name listed. So for the sake of just the demo, we're moving through this. We know Desert Ridge Middle School is a middle school, so students wouldn't be doing a FAFSA, but that's the prototype. So we're just going to move through. Students will choose the city they live in and find their high school's name that will attach them to that school's data. That's helpful for those of us who are pulling FAFSA data to have an awareness of how many of our students have completed the FAFSA at your school. You're able to pull that data from the federal student aid at any time, and it's helpful for us to know how we can lean in to better support high schools based on those numbers. So once the student finds their school, they choose it here and then hit continue. They ask them to confirm. As you can see, this is not the school name that we chose on the previous screen. Oh, now it is the school name that we chose on the previous screen, but it's the prototype. The actual website moves a little bit better than this particular part, but it's the prototype. Hit continue. Next, they ask about the student's financials. Again, here's another pop-up that says the student will be ineligible for federal student aid because they have not provided consent yet. So we're going to provide consent. They remind us again, these are all the things you're providing consent for, even questions if you want. So we're gonna approve. We're gonna provide consent, and then continue with the application. Now that pop-up, if I chose decline again, that pop-up will show up at the end before the student can submit their section, just as one last ditch effort to say, look, you are ineligible for federal aid, so you may want to provide consent to actually make this application worth your while. Because the student provided consent, they will not have to provide any income information or any information that would be reported to the IRS from their 1040 from 2022. Instead, they will be prompted with questions that ask about their assets and other financial information that would not be submitted to the IRS via the 1040. So they ask if the student has IRA rollover into another IRA or qualified account. No. Pension rollover, nope. The amount of college grant scholarships or AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS, we're just going to choose 0. And any foreign earned income exclusion, none. Continue. Now, for some students, they've been able to hit continue and leave the boxes empty. For others, they actually had to go back and put zeros. So I just say put zeros, it's all the same. Just put zeros if that becomes an issue to be able to move forward in the application. Next, they ask about the student's current total of cash, savings, and checking. Now, if the family income is less than 60K, federal student aid will not even consider the answers to this question or the asset questions in the parent section. The parent won't even be prompted with those questions if the income information is less than 60K. But we'll say the student said, nope, we don't have any money in the current total of cash, checking, and savings accounts, current net worth of investments, including real estate. Student will choose none. And then the current net worth of businesses and any investment farms that the family owns. Just as a reminder, this year, families are required to report all businesses and all family farms, the net value of all businesses and all family farms. So that's the market value minus any debt that the family owes is the net worth. All right, now they move to the next section where the student can list colleges that they would like to receive their financial information. As a reminder, this doesn't have to be colleges that the student has applied to already. These are just schools that they will want to receive their FAFSA information. One change this year is that students can list up to 20 colleges and universities that they would like to receive their FAFSA information. Again, Tamika discourages any student from applying to 20 schools. But we know that there are ambitious students. If they're interested in more than 20 schools, they have to wait till their FAFSA has been processed, log back in, delete their list of college, list their college list, delete that college list, add more schools that they would like to receive their information, and then they will be submitted. We acknowledge that it's a lag now. Most FAFSAs have not been processed yet. So students who are waiting to add more colleges to their list may have to wait till mid-February to be able to make those FAFSA changes. So we encourage them to just hold tight. Actually, I learned this a minute ago. Don't just choose the school. All right, so students can list up to 20 schools. Let's just add a couple. We're going to add Barnard, although I selected Arlington, Virginia. We're going to choose Barnard, Brown, Lehigh. Let's just choose Rice. And then we're going to come down here and continue. Here's a pop-up that comes up for Virginia too. Here it's showing for a New York resident, but to be eligible for a state grant in the state of Virginia, the student's college list has to have at least one in-state college. So at least one Virginia in-state school must be on the list in order for the student to be considered for Virginia state, those 6 state grants, or 5 state grants that are listed that requires FAFSA completion. So once students review that information, they go next. And then essentially that's all the student section. The student has done all sections here. Just as with previous FAFSAs, they can choose the drop down and review every question that they have submitted on the FAFSA. If they want to change it, they can select the blue hyperlink and it'll take them directly to that question on the application, and they can make changes and keep moving through. Also, if they scroll down to the bottom, it lets them know the status of their contributors. So it lets them know who they invited to be a contributor, what their role is, the date that the contributor was added to the student's FAFSA, and then they let the parent know their status, or the student know the status, whether they've been invited to complete the application. If the parent has logged in and started, it'll say processing. And if the parent has submitted their section, it'll say completed. We're going to continue. We all are familiar, those of us who work with FAFSAs in the past were familiar with this statement at the end. Let students know essentially what it means to sign the FAFSA, how they're expecting the information to be accurate that you're submitting, and that by signing and submitting it electronically, the student is certifying that they will use federal and state financial aid only to pay for the cost of attendance at a institution of higher ed. They are not in default of any federal student loans or have made satisfactory agreements to repay it. They do not owe money back on federal student grants or have made satisfactory arrangements to repay it. They will notify their school if they are in default of any federal student loans, and they will not receive a federal Pell Grant for more than one school at the same time period. So with that understanding, we are going to select, yep, we agree, and then submit. So this is what the students will see when they have submitted their section. It says, you're almost there. The student section is completed. So this lets us know that the parents now have to complete their section. So let's go to view parent contributor. When the parent receives their email letting them know that they are invited to complete their section of the FAFSA, this is essentially what the body of the email is going to look like. And so it gives them the information about, yep, you need to log in to complete your section of the FAFSA for the student. So the parent has created their FSA ID and password. And then when they actually log into the FAFSA website, whether or not they get the email or not, once the student has listed them on the FAFSA, if they log into Federal Student Aid website and complete FAFSA, they will get this pop-up that says, Rhea Tran wants your help on a FAFSA form, lets them know what their responsibilities are or what they're expected to do. Parents are required to provide their financial and demographic information on the student's FAFSA. This does not make you financially responsible for Rhea's educational costs or any federal student loans they decide to accept. So the parent can decline the invitation, but if the student is a dependent, they need their contributor to provide information on the FAFSA. So Rhea's mom said, yep, I'll do it. She's accepting the invitation. And for parents who have more than one kid, they may, this tab at the top is helpful in helping them to know which kid's FAFSA they're actually working on. So they let them know, hey, you've entered her application. Oh, one thing I meant to mention at the beginning, if you're working with Spanish-speaking families, up in the top corner, families can choose Espanol, and it will translate the entire FAFSA website into Spanish. So they can move through the entire website, not just the FAFSA, any section of this website in Spanish if they make that change. It was something that, you know, we had awareness of, but I didn't realize till recently that some partners may not have known that option is available for families. We're going to click continue. Again, the parent has the same onboarding that students have once they enter into the actual FAFSA form. They'll have this video. Again, we can't see it because this is a prototype. But we're going to keep it moving through the 4 steps of the onboarding. They let them know who the contributor is, just kind of what that process is looking like, even if the parent was the contributor who got the invitation. They tell them what to expect, even explaining the consent and approval process kind of in short form, and they're going to be able to know what it looks like once they get to that section in the application. Again, we saw this section with the students is actually identical, these 4 kind of onboarding screens. But now the parent is going to start their application, well, their section of the student's application. Again, the parent is given their basic identifying information to confirm, and this parent is choosing continue. Now they get the screen that where they have to provide, or where they're prompted with the option to provide consent and approval so that the student could be eligible for federal student aid. Again, we saw this with the student, but here are the ins and outs. Again, in the second section, I summarized just kind of what these bullets are so families know what they are accepting, what they're providing consent and approving to. So we're going to say the parent provides consent, sure. So now they move to the parent demographic section. They just want to collect a little information about the parent. So the parent's current marital status, let's say this parent says that, you know what, I'm married. Then they're going to continue. Now the parent will have the opportunity to add the information for the other parent if they like. It's not necessary to add that information if both parents filed married, filed jointly. But if the filing status is married, filed separately, then it's necessary for the student to complete this section of the FAFSA. Because this is a demo, the submit button should show up right here, but for whatever reason it's not. So let's go back and just hit single continue to move to the application. As you can see, the prototype site is imperfect as well. But let's move through it. The way that generally works though, the parent can add information about their partner spouse on that second screen and then hit continue. That partner will get an email to complete their section of the FAFSA. That's how it's supposed to work. So the parent state of legal residence is Virginia, and they already populated this with the dates that the student included as the date that they became a legal resident in the state of Virginia. That date can obviously change if it differs from what the student did. Next is the parent financial section, where they're asking parents for the information that they would not be submitting to the IRS on the 1040, because remember, the parent provided consent. So they're not going to ask them about any income specific questions because they've already consented to that information coming from the IRS. So at any time during 2022, 2023, did the parent or anyone in their family receive benefits from any of the following federal programs? Families can choose whichever programs make sense for them. If, just as a reminder, I sent out an email last week, but for the free and reduced price school lunch question, families have to make sure that they would qualify for the program based on the requirements set by the Department of Agriculture. I sent out a list of, I sent out the kind of the form that you can use to determine the poverty guidelines and the information that's needed to determine if a student will qualify for that program, but only click that button if the student will qualify based on the the eligibility requirements, not based on the fact that they may attend a school where everyone receives free or reduced lunch based on the high percentage of students in that school that may qualify. So make sure each particular student is assessed individually to determine if they will qualify before choosing this question. Well, we're going to say none of these. But if a parent chooses yes to any of these questions, they are not required to report any asset information. Any asset information. All right, based on the information that they have access to from the 2022 tax return, this question asks, is the parent's family size different from that? There may be an additional dependent that the parents may not file on their income tax return, but they provide more than half of that person's financial support. The family will choose yes if that question, if the number is different so that they can make the changes here. This is one of the few questions where a family can make changes to the information that's coming from the IRS. And it only relates to family size. We're going to choose no. And just to be mindful, the family size is the family that's associated with the contributor, not the family where the student may live if it is a single parent household. All right, next, number in college. How many people will be in college in the family? Next year, we can say 3. Excuse me, 3, not including the parents. So let's say it's a couple other kids in the family. This is just a stab in the dark. Next, the parents will input asset information or other information they did not submit on their in their 1040. So any IRA rollovers, we're going to choose 0. Pension rollovers, 0. If the parent received the earned income tax credit, they will choose the answer that's relevant for them. We're going to choose no. The amount of college grant scholarships or AmeriCorps benefits reported as income to the IRS, again, 0. And then any foreign earned income exclusions, 0. Ooh, let's see water. Next, they ask more parent asset information. We're getting closer to the end of the application. Any annual child support received, they're listed as an asset. In years past, it was listed as income. Now they shifted the child support question from income to actual assets. So we're going to choose 0 for that amount. Again, this question is not new to us. The current total of cash, savings, and checking, current meaning on the day that the family is submitting the FAFSA. Federal student aid is asking for the total. If the family income is higher than 60K, though, again, this information will not be used in determining the student's eligibility for federal or state financial aid. Lastly, the current net worth of businesses, investment firms. Again, all businesses, all investment firms, the net worth has to be reported on beginning this year's FAFSA. All right, now that we've entered all the parent financials section, this is the end of the parent screen. Of the parent section of the FAFSA. This is the screen that's going to come up at the end to give them an opportunity to review any questions that they've submitted in the application already. And so all that's left to do is for them to sign and submit the application electronically. So again, this summary comes up. We are not new to this section at all with the FAFSA, those of us who've supported families in the past. So the family will choose, the parent will choose, the contributor will choose that they are agreeing to the terms outlined, and then they will sign and submit. So a couple folks have asked me, what will the screen look like after the student's application has been processed or has been submitted officially? This is what that final screen should look like. If they scroll down, it'll actually be a space, say on this page, there'll actually be a space where it shows a kind of a workflow where it'll say student started FAFSA, student continued FAFSA, student submitted their section, parent submitted their section, which means that the application is done from the student end. The next step, they'll get information from the colleges they've been admitted to and that they have listed on the FAFSA and CSS profile if necessary. And that will be the next kind of point of contact they will get in terms of financial aid eligibility. So this is the 24-25 free application for federal student aid. As I mentioned earlier, I will provide the link for the prototype for those who kind of want to play around with it or want to see what it looks like from the student end in more detail. I'll provide the link and the information for that in the after workshop email that I'll send out. So are there any more questions, I guess, about the basic application? I will go in the next section, I'll go into deep dive. So we're actually going to unpack what some of the changes are, some of the terminology changes, so on and so forth. But are there any questions about the actual application? I'll give a minute now, but we certainly have a whole Q&A section coming shortly. Yes, Bridget, can you drop your question in the Q&A, please? All right, if a parent files a paper tax return, will the DRT not work? So DRT is no longer a thing. It's the data exchange, direct data exchange. DDX is now the new term. If the parent completes the paper FAFSA, they still must provide consent for their financial information to be pulled from the IRS. So the direct data exchange is not anything that any student or contributor can avoid. They must provide consent even when they're doing the paper copy for their information to be pulled from the IRS. You said the screen will pop up after the parent signs and submits. How will the student know that everything is submitted? The student will log back in and see their FAFSA workflow, and they'll be able to see what the parent has been submitted. I showed you on the previous screen before we switched to the parent section. At the bottom of the student submission screen, it shows a contributor status. They'll be able to see submitted on in that particular section by each contributor's name if they have more than one. I've had students come in and out. I'm sorry if I missed this. Is it normal to see joint tax return for 2022 with current spouse under the student financials? If the student is married, yes. There are students who are married who have joint tax return with their spouses. So be mindful that this is for students of all ages, not just traditional high school age students. So yes, it could be an answer. Do they check the exact accuracy of the total cash, checking, and savings, or is it just an estimate? Jenna, if they choose it for verification, they would want that number in the box to be generally an amount, like the estimated amount, but they want it to be as accurate of an estimate as possible. So no, they're not looking for specific like cent amount or like she's off by $10. No, but they want the number to be relatively similar to what's actually submitted in that box. Next, will the student still get a message at point of submission that says something about, based on the information provided, you will qualify for sub and unsubsidized loan, as well as some message about Pell? Yes, the student will get that once the FAFSA has been processed. Most students have not had processed FAFSAs yet, so that's why it's not showing up at the final screen like it has been in the past. It's now a little bit of time between submission and processing. So that information will come when the FAFSA has been processed. No, they aren't married and their parents haven't done their partner. I'm not completely sure what that question is about. Can the contributor only see the invite through email, or are they able to log into the account and see that? Yes, as I mentioned a couple times, the parent, once the student has listed the parent on the FAFSA, the parent can log into Federal Student Aid's website, and the invitation will pop up to say that, you know, the student needs you to complete a part of their application. What are some verification paperwork that is usually requested? It really depends on the question. Federal Student Aid can ask the family to confirm any question on the FAFSA. So depending on the question, what information they would have to provide. But whatever question they choose, the school or Federal Student Aid, if that's the person choosing, selecting the family for verification, they will give a list of documents that will satisfy that requirement. But the list is very vast depending on which question that they ask. Some students may be chosen to choose to verify their citizenship, their address, their state of residence, income, asset, if any of that could be chosen. But once a student is selected, they'll tell them what is required. The student is not married, but is showing joint return under student financials. So then the student will not choose, they will choose whatever question is relevant for them. This may be something super specific to a student. You're working with Bridget. Generally, it'll only show up, it will show up for every student, but they would only choose the answer that makes sense for them. This may be something we would need to sidebar. Let's see a couple other questions. All right. Well, let's take about 2 minutes of a break to give me a minute to reset, and we're going to jump into the deep dive shortly. So 2 minutes to reset.